The dust of 2 years on the trail had settled into Jedediah Stone's bones, and he expected to find nothing more than ghosts at his homestead. He'd left after a bitter fight with his brother, Caleb, the words between them as sharp and final as a gunshot. For 24 months, Jedediah had drifted, taking work where he could find it, his Colt a grim negotiating tool in towns that spat out men like him. He'd sent no letters and received none. Now, returning to the Montana Territory in the summer of 1878, he anticipated collapsed fences, a cabin surrendering to the elements, and the silence of a place abandoned. He was prepared for the ache of it, the deserved punishment for his running. But as his black horse, Shadow, crested the final rise, the sight below knocked the breath from his lungs. It wasn't ruin. It was life. The small plot of land Caleb had insisted on tilling was not choked with weeds but flourishing with rows of corn, beans, and squash, vibrant green against the parched brown earth. The corral fence, which had been sagging when he'd left, stood straight and true. A half-dozen chickens scratched in the dirt near the cabin porch, and the 2 milk cows he and Caleb had bought were fat and content in the shade of the cottonwood. Then he saw her. A woman, slender and small-boned, was moving between the rows of vegetables with a watering can. She wore a simple white prairie dress, the hem smudged with dirt, her black hair pinned up in a severe knot at the nape of her neck. Her movements were economical and deliberate, a study in quiet efficiency. She did not seem to belong to the harsh landscape, yet she was master of her small corner of it. Jedediah urged Shadow forward, his hand resting instinctively on the worn grip of his pistol. He was a man accustomed to threats, and this peaceful, impossible scene felt more threatening than any drawn weapon. As he drew closer, she straightened up, her dark eyes finding his. There was no alarm in her expression, only a calm, watchful stillness. She was young, perhaps 23, and her face was a mask of polite neutrality. She was Chinese, a rarity this far from the railroad camps and the goldfields of California. "This is the Stone homestead," Jedediah said, his voice rough from disuse. It was a statement, not a question. The woman gave a short, precise nod. Yes, her voice was soft, with an accent that smoothed the edges of the word. "I'm Jedediah Stone." Another nod. "I know." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. He swung down from his horse, the leather of his saddle groaning in the afternoon heat. He felt large and clumsy in her presence, his dusty clothes and the gun on his hip seeming like artifacts from another, more brutal world. "Who are you? What are you doing on my land?" "My name is Lynn," she said, setting the watering can down. "I am tending the farm." "I can see that." "That doesn't answer my question." He took a step closer, trying to read something in her unreadable face. "Where's my brother? Where's Caleb?" For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her features, a shadow of sorrow so brief he almost missed it. "He is gone." "Gone where?" Jedediah's gut tightened. He had imagined 100 scenarios for his return, most of them involving a reconciliation or another fight. He had never imagined this empty space where his brother should be. "He went to town," Lynn said, her gaze dropping to the dark soil at her feet. "To file papers at the territorial office. Last fall. He did not come back." The words hung in the dry air. Last fall. That was more than 8 months ago. A man didn't just disappear for 8 months in this country without reason, and the reasons were seldom good. Jedediah looked from the thriving garden to the solid cabin, his mind struggling to connect the pieces. "You've been here alone since then?" "Yes." "And you did all this?" He gestured around them, at the proof of relentless, back-breaking work. "The chores must be done," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. A wagon rattled up the road then, breaking the spell. A portly, well-dressed man sat at the reins, a sheaf of papers resting on the seat beside him. He pulled his team to a halt and surveyed the scene with an air of ownership that set Jedediah's teeth on edge. The man's eyes slid over Jedediah, dismissing him as a common drifter, before settling on Lynn with a condescending smile. "Miss Lynn," the man said, his voice oozing a false cordiality. "I see you have a visitor. I do hope he's not causing you any trouble. This is my ranch, Mr. Jedediah said, stepping forward.
Who are you?
The man's smile tightened. He was Silas Croft, a land speculator from town who bought up claims from failed homesteaders for pennies on the dollar. He had the soft hands of a man who profited from the sweat of others. Silas Croft, he announced, puffing out his chest. And I'm afraid you're mistaken. This ranch is collateral against a debt owed to me by the late Caleb Stone. A debt that is now long past due. He picked up the papers. I have the writ of Caesar right here. It's a shame, really. The girl has done admirable work, but business is business. Jedediah looked at Lynn. Her face was pale, but her chin was high. She stood her ground, a small, unmovable rock against Croft's blustering tide. My brother's not dead, Jedediah said, the words tasting like ash. He didn't know it for a fact, but to admit it to this vulture felt like a betrayal. Isn't he? Croft shrugged. He vanished 8 months ago. The territorial marshal considers the case closed. Disappeared, presumed dead. The debt remains. I've been patient with the girl, letting her stay on through the winter, but the time for charity is over. I'm taking possession. Jedediah felt the familiar, cold calm settle over him, the feeling that always preceded violence. He had come home seeking an end to that life, but the world wouldn't let him go. He saw the way Croft looked at the ranch, not as a home, but as a number in a ledger. He saw the way he looked at Lynn, as an inconvenience to be swept aside. You're not taking anything, Jedediah said, his voice low and flat. He didn't move his hand toward his gun. He didn't have to. The intent was clear in his eyes, in the sudden stillness of his posture. Croft's face lost some of its color. He hadn't counted on a man like this appearing. He had expected to deal with a lone, unprotected woman. Now, see here. This is a legal matter. It stopped being a legal matter the moment you called my brother late, Jedediah replied. This is his home. It's my home. You'll leave now. Croft hesitated, his gaze flicking from Jedediah's cold eyes to the cold tied down at his hip. He was a man of paper and intimidation, not of lead and blood. He licked his lips, gathering his wounded pride. This isn't over, Stone. You can't fight the law. I'll be back. And I'll bring the marshal with me. He snapped the reins, turning his wagon in a wide, clumsy circle, and kicked up a cloud of dust as he retreated toward town. The dust settled, leaving a silence broken only by the cawing of a distant crow. Jedediah turned to Lynn. Her composure was still intact, but he could see the faint tremor in her hands. He had defended her, defended the ranch, but he was a stranger to her. A dangerous man who had appeared out of nowhere. For all she knew, he was a bigger threat than Croft. He will be back, she said quietly. I know. He looked around at the homestead, at the life she had single-handedly protected and nurtured. He had come back for a reckoning with his brother, but it seemed he had found a different kind of debt to settle. You better tell me everything, he said. Starting with how you came to be here with my brother. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, with a slow nod, she turned and walked toward the cabin. Come inside, she said. The sun is hot. Inside, the cabin was sparse but immaculate. A simple table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. A small stove was cold in the corner. His brother's cot was neatly made, and another, smaller bedroll was laid out on the other side of the room. On a small shelf sat a handful of books and a small, intricately carved wooden bird. Everything spoke of order and persistence. Lynn moved to the stove and began preparing coffee, her movements fluid and practiced. Jedediah remained by the door, feeling like an intruder. He watched her, trying to understand the woman who had saved his legacy from ruin while he had been running from it. Caleb found me near the railroad line, she began, her back to him. My father worked on the rails. There was a cave-in. Many men were lost. She paused, and the silence was heavy with what she didn't say. My father was a good man. He knew Mr. Caleb. They had traded before. Your brother was an honorable man. He found me after. I had nowhere to go. No family here. She turned, her face impassive, but her story painted a grim picture. A young woman, alone and grieving, in a country that was often hostile to her people. He brought me here, she continued. He said it was a safe place. He said I could work, earn my keep, and when the farm was profitable, we would be partners. He was teaching me to read English from his books, she gestured to the shelf. He said a mind needs tending, same as a garden. Jedediah looked at the books. Caleb had always been the reader, the dreamer. Jedediah had been the fist. It was one of the things they had fought about. He respected you, Lynn said, as if reading his thoughts. He spoke of you often. He said you carried a storm inside you, but that your heart was true. The words were a punch to the gut. While Jedediah had been nursing his anger across 2 territories, Caleb had been defending him to a stranger. The shame was a physical weight. This debt to Croft, Jedediah asked, his voice tight. What is it? For seed and supplies, Lynn answered. The first year was hard. The drought nearly broke him. Mr. Croft extended credit, but his terms were difficult. Caleb was planning to pay him off with the money from his last freight run. That was the other reason he went to town. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and placed one on the table for him. He took the wagon and our 2 best mules. The sheriff in town said they found the wagon abandoned 10 miles south of here. The mules were gone. No sign of Caleb. Jedediah sat down, the coffee untouched. A freight run, a debt, an abandoned wagon. It sounded like a robbery. A robbery that had ended badly. But something felt wrong. Caleb was no fool, and he was handy with a rifle. Croft showed up a month after Caleb disappeared, Lynn said, sitting opposite him. He said the ranch was his. I told him no. I showed him the homestead papers Caleb had filed. It is stone land. He got angry. He has been coming back ever since, making threats. And you stayed, Jedediah said, more to himself than to her. You faced him down, worked the land, and waited. I made a promise to your brother, she said simply. He gave me shelter. He treated me with kindness. I told him I would watch over his home. A promise is a debt. Her simple, profound sense of honor made his own flight seem all the more cowardly. He had abandoned his brother, his home. She, a stranger, had defended it all with nothing but her will and her 2 hands. Over the next few days, a quiet routine settled over the homestead. Jedediah took over the heavier work, mending the barn roof and splitting firewood, his body rediscovering the familiar rhythms of ranch labor. Lynn continued to tend her garden and the animals, moving with a grace that made the hardest work look effortless. They spoke little, but a silent understanding grew between them. He watched her, learning the language of her quiet determination. She watched him, seeing the gunslinger's tension slowly drain away, replaced by the weary resolve of a man trying to mend what he had broken. Jedediah knew Croft would not give up. The man's greed was a palpable thing. He rode into the nearby town of Redemption, a dusty collection of clapboard buildings, to make inquiries. The territorial marshal, a tired man named Blevins, offered little help. Your brother lit out, son, Blevins said, not looking up from his paperwork. Happens all the time. Men get tired of scratching a living from this dirt, they just walk away. Not Caleb, Jedediah insisted. He wasn't a man to run from his obligations. Maybe not. Or maybe he ran into trouble on the trail. It's a big country. A man can disappear easy. Blevins finally looked up. Croft's claim is legal, on paper. The debt is real. Unless you can pay it, he's got a right to the property. How much? $200. Gold coin. It was a fortune. Jedediah had less than $30 to his name. He left the marshal's office with a cold knot in his stomach. He was trapped. He could use his gun to drive Croft off again, but that would only bring the law down on him and Lynn. He needed a different kind of weapon. He decided to search the area where Caleb's wagon had been found. It was a long shot after so many months, but it was the only move he had left. He told Lynn he would be gone for a day or two. She just nodded, her eyes telling him to be careful. He rode south, following the old freight trail. The sun beat down, and the land was empty and unforgiving. He found the spot the marshal had described, a shallow ravine just off the main trail. There was nothing left to see. The wind and rain had wiped away any sign. He was about to give up when something caught his eye, a glint of metal half buried in the dirt under a scrub brush. He dismounted and dug it out. It was a belt buckle, silver with a simple crest engraved on it. His father's buckle. He had given it to Caleb the day he left. He searched the area more carefully now, his heart pounding. A few yards away, hidden beneath a pile of rocks that was too deliberate to be natural, he found it. A small, locked strongbox. Caleb's strongbox. It took him 10 minutes to break the lock with the butt of his pistol. Inside, nestled amongst some business ledgers, was a leather pouch. It was heavy with coin. He counted it quickly. Over $300. More than enough to pay Croft. And beneath the pouch was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a business ledger. It was a letter, in Caleb's handwriting. It was addressed to him. Jedediah. He unfolded it with trembling hands. Brother, it began. If you are reading this, it means I did not make it back, and you did. I suppose I should be grateful for that much. I'm writing this because I have a bad feeling about this run. Croft has been pressing too hard. His numbers don't add up. I think the debt is a lie, a pretext to seize the land. The water rights on our creek are more valuable than he lets on, especially with the railroad planning a new spur line 10 miles north. Jedediah's blood ran cold. It wasn't just about a homestead. It was about the railroad. The letter continued. The money in this box is from the freight run. It's for the ranch. More importantly, it's for Lynn. She is a good and decent soul in a world that has been cruel to her. I promised her father I would see her safe. I was going to make her a legal partner in the homestead. The paperwork is with our lawyer in Bozeman. If I'm gone, the partnership falls to you. Protect her, Jedediah. Protect our home. Don't let the anger that sent you away be the thing that destroys what's left of us. He sat there in the dirt, the letter in his hand, the weight of his brother's last words settling on him. Caleb hadn't been robbed by common trail bandits. He had been silenced by Silas Croft. His disappearance was murder, dressed up as a business default. And Jedediah now held the proof. Or at least, the beginning of it. The letter wasn't enough for a marshal, but combined with the money, it was enough to confront Croft. He rode back to the ranch, a storm gathering inside him, just as Caleb had described. But this time, it was a storm with a purpose. When he arrived, he found Lynn on the porch, a rifle across her lap, watching the road. He came back, she said, her voice tight. With 2 other men. They said they would return tomorrow. With the marshal. To evict us. Let them come, Jedediah said, swinging down from shadow. He showed her the strongbox, the money, and the letter. She read it, her dark eyes welling with tears for the first time since he had met her. They were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude for the man who had befriended her. He was a good man, she whispered. The best, Jedediah agreed. And we're not going to let a man like Croft get away with what he did. The next morning, they were ready. Jedediah didn't want a gunfight on the land Caleb had worked so hard to build. He had another plan. He sent Lynn to saddle Shadow and ride for Marshal Blevins. Tell him I have proof that Croft is a thief and likely worse, he told her. Tell him to come at once. She hesitated. I will not leave you alone. I won't be alone. I'll be right here, on my property. Just go. Be quick. She finally agreed, her face set with worry. She rode out hard, a small, determined figure against the vast landscape. Not long after she was gone, Croft arrived in his wagon, flanked by two rough-looking men on horseback. Marshal Blevins was not with them. "Decided to handle this ourselves, Stone," Croft called out, a triumphant sneer on his face. "The marshal is a busy man. These gentlemen will serve as his deputies in this matter." The two men dismounted, their hands on their pistols. They were hired muscle, not lawmen. Jedediah stood on the porch, his hands empty and in plain sight. "The debt is paid, Croft. I have the money right here." He held up the leather pouch from the strongbox. Croft's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "Where did you get that?" "Caleb left it for me," Jedediah said calmly. "Along with a letter. A letter detailing your fraudulent debt and your interest in the railroad spur. A letter that's on its way to Marshal Blevins right now." Panic flashed in Croft's eyes. He had been exposed. His carefully constructed legal trap was falling apart. "You're bluffing."
Am I?
Jedediah asked. "There's only one way to find out. But once the marshal gets here and starts asking questions about where my brother went, things might get uncomfortable for you." Croft looked at his hired men. He was losing control. His bluff had been called. In his desperation, he made a fatal mistake. "Get the money," he snarled at his men. "He's alone." The two men drew their guns. But Jedediah had been waiting for this. In a single, fluid motion, he dropped behind a water barrel on the porch as the first shot splintered the wood where he had been standing. He drew his Colt, not firing wildly, but taking careful aim. This was the world he knew, the grim calculus of violence. He fired twice. One shot hit the first man in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. The second kicked up dirt at the feet of the other, making him jump back. It was a warning. "The next one won't miss," Jedediah yelled. The remaining gunman, seeing his partner down and realizing he was facing a man who was his clear superior, threw down his pistol and raised his hands. Croft, his face ashen with terror, fumbled for a pistol hidden under his coat. But he was clumsy and slow. Jedediah was on him in 3 long strides, knocking the gun from his hand and slamming him against the side of his own wagon. "It's over, Croft," Jedediah said, his voice a low growl. It was then that they heard the sound of approaching horses. Marshal Blevins arrived with Lynn riding beside him, a posse of 3 deputies behind them. They took in the scene, the wounded man, the surrendered gunman, and Croft pinned against the wagon. Lynn slid off shadow, her eyes finding Jedediah's, a look of profound relief on her face. Marshal Blevins dismounted, his tired eyes now sharp and focused. "Looks like I got here just in time, Stone. Or maybe a little late." "He has the letter," Lynn said, her voice clear and strong. With the testimony of the captured gunman, the discovery of the letter, and a deeper investigation into Croft's land dealings, the case against Silas Croft was sealed. He was arrested not only for fraud, but for the murder of Caleb Stone. It turned out he had ambushed Caleb on the trail, taking the mules and the money he thought Caleb was carrying, and hiding the body. He had never counted on the hidden strongbox, or on Jedediah's return. By the time the first snows dusted the peaks, the Stone homestead was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. The threat was gone, the debt was cleared, and the land was secure. Jedediah had used Caleb's money to file the partnership papers with the lawyer in Bozeman, just as his brother had intended. The homestead was now legally owned by Jedediah Stone and Lynn. He had thought about leaving again, thinking that the violence he had brought back with him had tainted the place. But Lynn had stopped him. "This is your home," she had said. "Your brother built it for you, too." And so he stayed. He worked the land, the simple, honest labor slowly healing the wounds inside him. The calluses on his hands felt more real than the cold steel of a gun. He and Lynn worked side by side, their shared history and mutual respect forging a bond stronger than any spoken words. The silence between them was no longer a space of caution, but of comfort. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, Jedediah stood on the porch, watching Lynn move through the garden she had brought back from the dead. He thought of the man he had been 2 years ago, full of anger and pride. He had ridden away in a storm of his own making and had come back to find that the quietest person he had ever met possessed a strength he was only just beginning to understand. A home wasn't just a patch of dirt or a cabin, he realized. It was a promise kept. And in the heart of the Montana wilderness, a wandering gunslinger and a steadfast gardener had, against all odds, found their way to one. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.